jobs that are available in our economy today. To put it a little more onerous, to state it a little more onerously, if you don't have some form of post-secondary education, there's a very good chance you're going to be poor in the United States. That's the reality that we face. By the way, I live in a state where not everyone has believed that, and we have paid the price for that in Indiana, because a state like Indiana, where we've done well with people having middle-class lifestyles in the manufacturing sector, when the reality hit, and it hit with some finality in the 2008 recession, waking up the next morning, a lot of people came to the realization, I'm no longer valuable in this economy, because those jobs that were lost in that recession and in the prior recessions, they sometimes came back, they are gone for good, and they are never coming back. So these challenges that I'm talking about are also compounded by geographic and racial disparities that are deeply troubling and should be troubling to all of us in society. Put plainly, our fastest growing populations are the least educated, representing a serious threat not to their success, but to our collective well-being as a society. That's the point of why addressing those gaps is so important. Now, the talent needs are running headlong into the other major issue confronting higher education, which is this issue of affordability broadly, and the business model of higher education specifically. Frankly, neither the way in which we determine tuition and allocate financial aid, or the ways in which we manage our colleges and universities from the business side are sufficient to meet our needs any longer. Everyone here knows that tuition has exceeded the rate of inflation since the early 1980s. Basically in the time since I and my classmates graduated from Bates. And what we now confront is an even bigger challenge, which is that historically what we saw was that in times when conditions were tight for families, government had a capacity to step in. The federal government or the states had a capacity to step in. But now we live in a world where the constraints on government are real and enduring, and the constraints on families and their students are even more so, at least more so than they ever were in the past. So the question is, how are we as a nation going to meet our need for talent? How are we going to provide more people with the opportunity to gain the skills and the knowledge and the abilities to effectively compete in the global economy? Well, what it all comes down to, and I'll end with this and then turn it over to President LeBlanc, what it all comes down to is we need to fundamentally rethink our higher education system to do two simple but powerful things. The first is to serve a lot more people. Right now, less than 40% of Americans have a college degree. We need 2/3 of them to have a college degree. That's a lot more people. It's about 23 million more than we are on the path to produce between now and 2025 if we just had a sort of linear increase in the attainment rate. And the second is, we have to serve those people better than we have in the past. Now, the fundamental platform upon which this new, better system has to be built is essentially the degree or the credential, whatever you want to call it. We have to shift how we as a country actually define what that degree means, what it represents. Right now, in its simplest terms, a degree is nothing more than an accumulation of credit hours, a time-based unit where the actual amount and the type of learning is actually highly variable. The time-based system of awarding degrees is obviously simply outlived its usefulness. The pace at which individual students are capable of learning, the prior learning experiences of students, their individual employment goals, all of these things are not well served in this time-based system. Instead, I see a system where learning is the core And I see that system evolving where what students learn and demonstrate that they can do with that learning is what matters the most. That the time that it takes students to obtain skills and knowledge will become less relevant, and what they know and they're able to do with their college degrees becomes the most important part. This outcome-based system will be more transparent for everyone involved. It'll be easier for students to navigate with clearer pathways to their degrees, and it'll be more accessible for people as economies change and the demands for new and different skills emerge. This system focuses on skills, abilities, and learning, and emphasizes ultimately what's important. What students learn, which is at the core of what Bates is all about, and how they can use it to navigate through life and through the labor market in specific. What would follow, I think, such a shift is the proliferation of new tools that will help us develop a more productive, effective, and efficient talent development system. Competency assessments, application of prior learning to degree pathways, new innovative educational delivery models. All of these things are possible in this new model. And as to the issue of affordability, we're going to have to confront that, but I think I'm going to leave that to after Paul speaks, because I think that requires us to get into a sort of two-way dialogue on the issue of affordability. Suffice it to say, though, that the changes that will be required when it comes to the affordability side, which everyone worries because Bates is perceived as one of the most expensive schools in the country, I'm going to argue that because of its emphasis on student learning and because of its deep engagement of students as citizens and active participants in the macro level changes that society requires, that Bates is actually well positioned when it comes to the affordability conversation going forward. But let's come back to those issues in a moment. Let me turn it over to what I think is one of the most interesting, innovative, and exciting college presidents in the country right now, Paul LeBlanc. Paul?
Thank you, Jamie. I'm going to take a minute to just call a couple of slides. I'll try not to bore you with that, the PowerPoint slides. While I do that, I'll tell you, if I may, unrelated to this whole topic, when my wife and I were married in 1986, we were in grad school in Porter's Church Mice, and we opened all the envelopes at the end of the night. And we realized, we could take a little bit of this money and go stay at the Parker House, which we did. And we had dinner in this great dining room, which used to have this great barrel vaulted ceilings, which they've now covered. And I can remember, I come, like Jamie, and as he alluded to, from a pretty poor background, I had no idea what a Somali was. So he came to the table and asked us what we were having for dinner. And I told him, he said, I have a beautiful wine, which you described, and he ended by saying it would be a steal. It's a steal at $65. And I still remember saying, I'd have to steal it if it's $65. There's no way we could afford that. I texted my wife, like, guess where I am tonight? So it's just great to be here. So the other thing I would have you take away is don't follow Jamie. Because I mean, he's covered this ground so well, and really in very parallel ways, and I think it reflects in some ways parallels in our own life, because this is, I want to tell you, I want to open up with just a little bit of an immigrant story, because this is the house in which I was born in New Brunswick, Canada. This was a hard-scrabble farming village of about 12 farms. And you know, if you've spent any time in Maine, which you obviously all did, you know that the only thing you can grow there are blueberries and potatoes for the most part. This is further north than that, and rockier, and the weather's bad. But that's my grandfather and my sister, my older sister, which looks like a picture out of the 1800s, but even in the 1930s and 40s and 50s in maritime Canada, it was almost like 100 years, even further back than much of New England. And we immigrated when I was 3 years old. That's as cute as I ever was. It wasn't even that cute, but I never got better in that moment. And this is my visa picture so we could get into the U.S. This is the picture that when my family immigrated. My parents had 8th grade educations, which was sort of the norm, by the way, in the 20s and 30s and 40s. It wasn't to finish high school, it was actually to go until 8th grade. And then, I don't know why my daughter said, Dad, why do you put this picture in this? This was in America, sporting an outfit that only a few people can pull off. Double plaid. And I really, they say it's like that, we know you're going to be wearing something that looks like that in the home when you're about 90. It's probably true. The next picture, I've not found a gracious way to sort of do this because it sounds like an outright parental brag, and it's probably 10% of which it is. But these are my daughters. Emma on the left, who's at Oxford, and Hannah on the right, who just last week arrived at Stanford to start her doctoral studies. They're both in graduate school. This is my father-in-law, who also went no further than the 8th grade, and visiting my daughter at Oxford, and his first time ever outside the country, and the first time with a passport. And the reason I want to sort of show you this series of pictures is that the thing that you have when you connect these dots was my ability to get an affordable, accessible, meaningful education at a Massachusetts State College at a time when I think for $35 you could apply to 5. Like, you know, like check the boxes of which of the state colleges you want to go to. 3 or 5. I can't remember. And their lives are transformed. I'm thinking about so what Jamie said. You know, my mother is 95 and lives in Waltham nearby and is still sharp and in assisted living. I mean, her universe is different than her granddaughter's, and she knows it and loves that fact and revels in the life that they have, and they sort of revel in where she's come from. And it was really education that made that possible. So in a sense, I felt like, you know, we lived a version of the, I was about to say American dream, but actually today, it's actually more the Danish dream, because there's more social mobility now in Denmark than there is in the US. And that's true also, by the way, can you name your countries, by the way? No, not Sweden. This is Norway, first one's Denmark. This is, Denmark, Norway. I'm messing up my own slides. This is Finland, so all those good socialist countries. Canada, which you mentioned, is ahead of us in terms of social mobility. So is Sweden, finally. Germany, and then most galling, that most calcified next to England of European countries, France. All of them have more social mobility than we do. People find that hard to believe, but it's true. In fact, if you look at the Gatsby curve, what we know is that in terms of intergenerational movement, the picture gets even worse. And what we also know is that today in America, if you are born in the bottom quintile of income, there's a 60% chance you will live your life in poverty. 60% chance. By the way, the flip is also true. That if you are born in the top quintile, there's a 60% chance that you will live your life in wealth. And what Pew tells us from their work is that the one thing that moves that dial is education. 3 times as likely to move out of poverty if you have a college degree. This is the thing that's at risk in our country today. We talk a lot about social inequality, we talk about disparities of wealth, we talk about sort of the sort of rigidity we have in our class structure. Jamie's covered this ground better than I have, so I'm going to sort of move from that. Talking a little bit about how we've thought about our programs and sort of 3 key questions that we spent a lot of time thinking about. So one is that our national policy debate, and I've never seen higher education more in the media and more on the front page than it is today. And I think it's because of that sense of desperation. All of you who have young kids, you probably have some of this feeling, how do we do this? I have a nephew and niece, he and his wife saved, I think, $150,000. That's a lot of money for them. They work really hard. He's a landscaper. For their first kid to go off to college, she got accepted to Tisch. She's wonderful in theater, right? This is the dream. It's the dream. $75,000 a year. They're only halfway to the goal. And they look like, how do we do this? Like, how can that be? We work so hard, we put so much money away. I mean, this is the sort of desperation that people have today. And so there are lots of different higher educations, and one of the things that muddles our discussion is that we're not clear about which education we want to fix. I mean, there's a denominationally involved higher education, religious affiliated schools. There's a research higher education that we love and we want to sort of have thrive, and people who are involved in this part say there are problems here too that we should fix about research and support. There is a military higher education. There is the traditional coming-of-age higher education that Bates provides, and a lot of fine, smaller residential institutions, and as Jamie said, a very small percentage of American college students. There is an entertainment higher education, which is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and it drives a lot of sort of skewed policies and thinking about where we spend money. If you've seen the University of Oregon's new football facility, training facility, which was made available by the Phil Knight of Nike, it's obscene. It's obscene that we would build that on a public campus today. And money is fungible, so don't think, oh, well, that was a donation, so that's okay. That donation means other money is moving in other places and not where it should be. And then there's the education that we spent a lot of time in our program I'm about to describe to you is about, which is the education of 37 to 40 million Americans who have some credits to no credits and no degree. At a time, and as Jamie suggested, some 70% of new jobs require at least a 2-year degree arts equivalent. This is the huge problem. I was haunted as we developed this program. We met with Mayor A.C. Wharton of Memphis, Tennessee, really one of the more enlightened mayors in America. And he described how he had worked mightily to get a broom company to open a new facility in Memphis, bringing 500 low to medium skilled jobs to an economy that desperately needed them. They had 22,000 people show up for the open houses, the employment fairs for this broom company. Do you know how many positions they were able to fill? 150 out of the 22,000 people. So the skills crisis we often hear about is a split skills crisis. There are 3 million unfilled jobs at the top And the reality is, if you're a junior high schooler who knows Ruby on Rails, you can get a job in Silicon Valley tomorrow. You don't need college. You may need it for lots of other good reasons that you don't know about yet, but you can get a job. It's about jobs. And at the bottom, we have this huge issue of basic skills and medium skills, and the kind of work stability and on-ramp into better life, better work, that is deprived if you don't have this sort of education. And it's interesting, I sit on a board that has the Telecommunication Workers Union of America. And here's a good example where they have a huge wave of impending retirements of linemen, guys who go out and climb poles. That was once a job you could do with a high school degree, no more. You don't need a college degree per se, but you need post-secondary education, something equivalent to what many community colleges do, because these are highly technical jobs now. There are math skills you need, there are technical skills you need that you just can't rely on a high school degree any longer. So we're really talking about this population who are in desperate need. And so the first was, who do we want to serve? The second was, we thought a lot about technology. We think about technology in three ways. The first one is technology that allows you to keep doing what you're doing, but improve it. So we took the overhead projector from the bowling alley and brought it into the classroom back around 1950 or 1940s. This was, the beginning of a long tradition of using technology in American classrooms. And it's really, American Higher Ed is a great success story, and there's just been wonderful things that we've done. None of it makes higher education more affordable, right? It just adds expense. So our technology budget, our IT budget at my university has ballooned over the last few years, and we've added a lot of technology, and that's why. The second use of technology is to continue doing what you've always been doing, but to drive cost out of the model, and that's mostly labor. So if you've checked in at an airport kiosk, you have now engaged in a whole set of processes that are pretty much as they've always been. Checking you against your credit card database, checking you against the passenger list, checking your bags, now we check you against the TSA fly list. We do all of these things. We generate a baggage tag, and we do it with a tiny percentage of the people that we used to need to do it. But it's the same process, and we've driven cost out of the model. So the American steel industry is enjoying a kind of recovery today, about 10% of the workforce that it once employed. And they're not working in high school generated jobs anymore. They're in antiseptic control rooms, looking at screens and managing controls. I thought it was very telling that in the same week that Kodak filed for bankruptcy, this is a company that employed 143,000 people at its height. Instagram was purchased by Facebook for, I think, $1.5 billion. And how many employees did it have at that time of that sale? 13. So a lot of people think that it's this use of technology that characterizes a economic recovery that has not been attended to with a job recovery, because we've seen enormous productivity being wrenched out of fewer people because of this technology. And then the third one we're really interested in, this is a picture of Amazon's warehouse, though I've been told that this is even changing, is uses of technology that completely change the game. You don't do what you've always done before, you rethink what you've done before. So Amazon came along and has sort of upended first books and now retail in lots of interesting ways. Interestingly, they're doing more of this now. I don't know if you've sort of followed what they're doing in their warehouses. They need far fewer people than they used to, but we like to think about this. So if you look historically at new paradigmatic shifts of technology, there is always a fallow period when labor is displaced before new jobs arise, and then labor comes back. And the real question today, and I think it's a really ominous one in some ways, are we in that sort of period? Are we, in fact, looking at a future in which humans don't have to work the way they once did, with no replacement system for thinking about that? So IBM's doing some really interesting upcoming conference. We do this every 2 years at IBM, where they bring together technologists, educators, and labor people to talk about this intersection. We really worry about it. So let me give you one simple example. Foxconn, that builds all the Apple devices that are probably in our pockets. This year, they purchased 1 million new robots. Think of the implications of that for China. When you displace, right, in a country that has to sort of have ferocious economic growth to produce enough jobs to lift its population out of poverty, huge social disruption starts to come when you have those levels of unemployment. So we're, I think there's really an interesting debate right now about the nature and future of work. But these are three ways we think about technology. Who are you going to serve? What's the problem you want to try to solve? How are you going to use technology? And then the last one is to marshal disaggregation. This unbundling that you often hear described as. And this happens in mature industries. When you take something that's always been vertically integrated, so the core of higher education is always vertically integrated within the form of the faculty. Faculty members think about programs, they devise the courses, they build the syllabi, they choose the materials, they curate the learning, they get it through governance, they deliver the course, they intercede with you when you're working in that course as a student. They do those teaching moments, they advise, they hopefully revise, and all of that is in the body of one person. Today what we're seeing in higher education is an unbundling of those functions. So in lots of new online programs, for example, and MOOCs, for example, you have subject matter experts who are faculty at some place working with instructional design teams, and these people who develop the course may never actually teach the course. And the people who are asked to teach the course may be an instructor, they may be self-paced as they are in one of our programs that you hear about in a moment. They may be peer-to-peer led. There are lots of ways of thinking about this. MOOCs are offering yet another alternative. And then new adaptive and personalized learning technologies, the kind of work that's come out of Carnegie Mellon that uses sort of intelligence to build the system, some of the same intelligence approaches that are used in gameplay. And now tutorial services are often third party. They get really, really good at it. They're 24/7. You don't have to go to the writing center, which is open certain hours. We use a lot of this for online students. You have assessment is now increasingly separated from the delivery of the course. Western Governors is a competency-based program of some note where the people who do the assessment are not at all engaged in the delivery, and there's a kind of integrity that comes with that. And then the people who revise the course may not be at all related in any of that, and they will increasingly use big data over many, many sections of the course to take a look at what's worked, what's not worked, and do sort of think about course redesign in very different ways. When you can unbundle them this way, and you apply technology, and you think about markets you want to serve, you can come up with very different models of delivery and education. So the one that and lots of people get really specialized, so I've been giving you examples, but you take a look at every one of these, there are many third parties out there, there are institutions who are really rethinking some of these things. So what we did in our program is to take all three of those and create a program which we modestly called College for America. And it's a program that made some history, I think, back in April. It was the first program in the history of higher education in America to be approved by the Department of Education for what's called the Direct Assessment of Student Learning. So Jamie alluded to this. The credit hour is an interesting sort of artifact. It was designed by Carnegie to figure out